My name is Haley, and I'll be your host as we discuss today's topic, which is secure data is compliant data, reducing compliance risk with DSPM. Now, this is brought to you by Sentra and hosted by VIB. Today's webinar will be about 45 minutes long, and we'll save the last 10 minutes or so for Q&A. We ask you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your window to ask any and all questions, and do our best to answer those during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. And if you have your pop-up blocker on, please ensure it is turned off, as we do have some great poll questions throughout the presentation. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker up, David Stewart, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Sentra.
Thanks, Haley, and welcome everyone. We've all seen compliance requirements become more stringent and the penalties for violation more severe. Several good examples of that recently: the HIPAA amendments to strengthen that regulation are now adding in things like multi-factor authentication, asset inventory and network mapping against protected health information, the right to timely termination of access controls if an employee leaves the organization. These requirements put additional burdens on security teams. On the sovereignty front, GDPR violations in 2024, there were several notable more than $100 million penalties issued against the likes of LinkedIn, Uber, and even recently Meta with a $250 million penalty for a data breach. So there's quite a bit of interest in the topic, and obviously those activities keep the auditors very busy, maybe even happy. But the question is, does that strengthen and satisfy your security requirements? That's a question that we want to answer today. I brought along two expert panelists here. I think they can help us to identify the intersections between compliance and security, talk about gaps, and find out what approaches might work. Let me introduce our two experts. Lou Rabon is the founder and CEO of Cyber Defense Group, CDG, as they go by. They're a consultancy for large enterprises focusing on implementing security programs, helping organizations move from reactive posture to proactive controls and security programs. And Lou, we're very happy to have you on board here. I know you cover a wide spectrum of industries too. The other panelist with me is Zach Schulze. Zach is a security engineer at SoFi. He focuses on implementing security programs and defining best practices and security models for his organization. SoFi is a fintech financial services company. They're subject to many, many regulations, PCI, California Data Privacy Act. I'm sure I'm leaving dozens off, right, Zach? You'll talk about those in a moment. So he's day in, day out implementing their security posture for addressing those compliance requirements, and finds it very, very challenging, candidly. So we're happy to have both of you on here. Before we go to some of the questions that I'll pose to you to let you respond, I'd love to conduct a quick poll with the audience and just see your impressions today on where, how does the security and compliance overlap. So let me bring up the first poll question there. And if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and clicking one of your responses to that. How confident are you in compliance efforts that they actually improve your security posture? Are you very confident, somewhat, not at all confident, or you don't even know? Love to just see what the audience today thinks about that. And by the way, I know that Haley said this at the beginning, but as we're going through, please insert any questions you might have in the Q&A panel as well, and we'll try to get to those as we see them. And Haley, probably what, another 30 seconds or so?
We'll give you just a few more seconds to finalize your poll answers, and then we'll get those shared out.
All right. All right, well, not terribly surprising. Not too many are very confident, but the level of respondents that said somewhat confident, compliance helps, but gaps remain, and that you're absolutely correct. Let's uh, let's let's dive deeper into that particular topic, and I'll start with a question to either Lou or Zach. Maybe both of you can comment on it. Data security in general, what is your definition of that? And then how do companies, how do so many companies essentially confuse compliance and security or maybe blend the two in ways that are or are not effective? So Lou, let's start with you on that.
Sure. Thanks, David, and welcome everyone. I guess first, what does data security mean to me? I mean, traditionally, the way that we define it in cybersecurity is the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So, ensuring that you're complying to those three standards, the confidentiality that it's only between the people you want it to be, the availability that you can get to it, and obviously the integrity that it's not messed with in transit or any other place, that when you save it, it's going to still be accurate. That's what it is. But in a business context, you've got, I would say it's exactly, you have the data you need, and you can use it effectively for the business without being nervous that it might be, leaked or abused. So even worse, with data security, if you don't have proper data security, sometimes that holds back innovation, because often organizations will say, well, we'd like to start collecting this information, but we're not sure, if we can actually display that we're protecting it correctly, et cetera. So that's the first part of your question. Did you want me to answer the other one too about
Well,
whether?
yeah, well, let's turn to
Yeah.
Zach real quick and get Zach's impression and his definition as well.
Yeah, I'd say definitely at a high level, aligned with what Lou was saying. CIA is pretty much foundational to how you look at something in terms of data security. But it's just that it's high level. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability could mean different things to different people, depending on context and interpretation. Um, from a security engineering perspective, uh, data security, before you can have data security or really understand what data security means, you have to understand your data and what that data is. So classification, etc. So from my perspective, it's the CIA, but before you can apply the CIA triad, you have to really understand the data you're talking about.
Makes sense. Lou, back to you. What is what are the common gaps that companies mistake compliance as satisfying security?
Yeah, it's compliance is a way to externally demonstrate, usually, that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in security. The problem is all the standards have gaps, and they're mostly not prescriptive unless you're going for something like NIST 853, which is extremely prescriptive about the type of controls you need to have. They intentionally leave it open, which is a good thing. And by the way, I'm not anti-compliance at all. If it weren't for compliance, many organizations would do even, fewer things when it comes to security. So
Mhm.
happy that that exists, and compliance is out there. But the big mistake is that by conforming to some checklist of whatever the compliance standard is, that's going to make you secure. And you mentioned HIPAA, at the top, and that's an example. HIPAA's been around since, I think, 96 is when that went into place. And the issue with that is they had the right idea, but the way it was implemented, they were extremely broad. Like, you must have a chief privacy and chief security officer. So what happened was, health organizations were just taking whoever they thought, maybe the CFO, they would give them that title. They wouldn't give them any responsibility or anything, because the compliance center just wasn't prescriptive. And that's, you've seen a lot of the healthcare breaches. That's the reason for that is, I think mistaking compliance with security means that you're going to have gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. I remember those introductory days of HIPAA. They are getting more prescriptive, as I alluded to there at the start. Zach, you're in the trenches in the real world there. What situations have you encountered where there's a mismatch, if you will, or a gap that gets created between compliance and overall security?
Yeah, I'd say it's really what I see is, again, kind of what Lou was saying is compliance is, again, at a high level. Generally, historically, they've not been super prescriptive about technical approach. So you may have a compliance standard that says you need to have logging and monitoring around your data, but what that actually looks like is open to interpretation for who's implementing it. And to one engineer and another engineer, those might mean completely different things. So, if you take that stance and you get an auditor coming in, and you can simply say, yeah, we have centralized logging and we have a system for monitoring, but I don't have an engineer looking at them. They're just in place. So you have compliance over the logging and monitoring of your data, but you're not actually implementing a secure fashion to ensure that you're utilizing those tools at your disposal. And that can really be applied across, all these compliance standards and all these compliance requirements where I can meet that the compliance requirement, but that doesn't really mean I'm taking a security-minded first approach.
Excellent. Good points there.
Yeah, could I add something to that too, David?
Please, yeah.
Often companies will also play the compliance game, which is around audit time. To Zach's point, that's when they're putting the evidence in place that they're doing this stuff. And then once the audit's over, you can security engineers are almost always going to run circles around an auditor because auditors typically, not always, but typically aren't technical. So it's easy to, put a smoke screen up. And then, yeah, once the audit's over, it's like, wait until the next audit cycle before you actually look at this stuff.
Yeah. That reminds me of my time years ago where that certain time of year, you have 3 months to get everything up to par. And then a month later, things are falling back to shambles.
Yeah, so it sounds like you both advocate and have moved increasingly towards a continuous model, I would hope, and certainly I would expect in your in the financial services realm in particular. But okay, it's great. So let's move on to another question here. Apologies real quick. If compliance isn't enough, what do companies need to be doing, right? Let's start with you, Zach, on that. You implement best practices. So what is a best practice here?
Best practice is a moving target. The best practice you implement yesterday may be different today. So from my perspective, organizations need to be far more proactive than they really are today. And what that looks like is getting those security engineers that have that mindset, not even just security engineers, just individuals at your company that have that security-minded perspective to be more proactive around what you're doing with your data. And what that looks like is being up to date with what's happening in the world. So you're not just looking to implement today's encryption algorithm over your data, but you're planning for 5 years from now when that algorithm may be obsolete. How can you be prepared to migrate away from it? So it's really just, thinking at things 3 steps ahead, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ahead, and ensuring that you're always prepared to make a drastic change as needed, and not finding yourself 15 years worth of tech debt because you haven't properly planned around these concepts.
Lou, I hear Zach saying this, and then I know that he comes from a relatively lean security team, and I'm sure many organizations face that similar challenge, right? Is how do you turn and become more proactive? So I'm curious, given your consulting, orientation for your business, what do you find is that works and doesn't work in terms of being able to achieve that objective?
Yeah, taking a programmatic approach. Organizations need to look at this as a program and as a kind of a living, breathing, evolving a program. And that's what Zach was mentioning too, like thinking not just where are you today, but thinking down the road. There is a way to do that, and that's by looking at it programmatically, cybersecurity can be broken down probably in, I don't know, 13 to 20 domains like security operations, GRC or governance, risk and compliance, incident response, third-party risk management, things like that. So if you look at how they all interact and work together, that's the only way to execute an effective cyber strategy. I think a lot of organizations are falling down, and this goes back to the compliance over security discussion. Organizations are falling down by trying to solve one or two of those, or throw tools at the problem or technology, and it's a people, process, and technology issue. So the technology is super important and it starts there, but you need to have the people and process around that. So the way that we often try to solve that is by looking at it holistically, and just as you would a human, if someone had an ache or a pain, a bad doctor will just give you some drugs for the pain and not ask you what the the real symptoms are and underlying problem is. And the good doctors are going to look at it, as a whole body problem and maybe lifestyle, things like that.
Sure. Totally makes sense. So changing topics slightly, I know that data sprawl is a big security challenge and one of the contributing factors, but what, how does it increase security risks, and how do you mitigate that? I'll throw that to you, Zach, for starters.
Yeah. How does it increase security risk? Well, the reality is you just don't know where your data lives. Me as a security engineer, that's one of the questions that I could ask myself every day and never have the answer to. If you look at an organization such as like SoFi, for instance, if we had 20, 30 different teams, all those teams are creating data. I don't necessarily know what data they're creating. I don't know if they're storing PII, SPII, PCI data. So when it comes to data sprawl, it's just, I might know where 10% of my data lives, and the other 90% is just unknown to me. So data sprawl is a real thing. It happens across many, many organizations, and usually due to high development velocity and scalability. Mitigation, though, that's an interesting topic because there's a lot of different approaches to it. But I think the first thing is being able to find a way to discover that data so you can actually understand where it lives. You can't really do mitigation of risk until you know where it is. And most organizations, I think, are starting to understand that, especially over the past couple of years, all the different data breaches we've seen some pretty big data breaches. So discovery of that data would be the fundamental first thing you can do to actually lead yourself into a mitigation strategy. And then that mitigation strategy really is, a well-defined approach that doesn't address it point in time, but is something that is repeatable by your engineers, by your staff.
Lou, let me throw the same question to you. Are you seeing that more broadly across different industry? That job one is the discovery piece, or?
Yeah, to Zach's point, you can't protect something if you don't know that you have it or where to protect it. That goes for data, that goes for assets, endpoints, things like that. So visibility is number one. And the data sprawl problem, if you think about this, we're talking about HIPAA 1996. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when data was not as cheap as it is today, when a company had to be a lot more selective about the data it held. If you look at price per terabyte now for storage, forget it. Data, no one really cares. And that data sprawl is also to what Zach was talking about with development teams using data. Like I don't know how many times we've got into an environment, and Zach, you may be fighting this issue too, where the developers say, no, we don't use production data in testing. We never do that. We would never do that. And then, what do? You use a tool like Sentra, and that's usually one of the first things that pops up is, where they've got some of this production data in their QA and test environments. And so, that the other issue is obviously SaaS tools. Depending on the company and how they control that, often under a certain dollar spend, different business units can actually spin up their own SaaS tools and start to use data. And, David, you were talking about privacy initiatives. That's one of the other areas that I've had some experience in. And yeah, GDPR, et cetera. You're talking about when a data subject makes a request and says, hey, I want you to erase my data. If you don't know all of the other places it lives, and then all of a sudden they get marketed to mistakenly because it lived in a repository that you had no idea about, some SaaS tool or something that was not reviewed, or you had no visibility, the team had no visibility of, then you've got you're out of compliance there. You might have a regulatory problem, and you might have to face fines, and then you've got, no one wants regulators crawling over their environment. Once they, there's too many companies, too many organizations to pay attention to. But the minute they put their laser on you because you've had one violation, now you've got to justify your entire security program, and that's difficult. So you're talking about the compliance cost of not having that visibility could really lead to some pain.
No, really good point. We see across our customer base also tangible benefits such as just reduced storage cost from abandoned or outdated data. So there's some real benefit there too. Let's shift to a poll question that I think is related to this topic, our second poll, because it might shed a little further light on what the rest of the group here sees in terms of challenges. I want to bring that slide back up. And Haley, I think you've got that poll up there. So let's just the only other poll question we're going to ask, if we could ask you to make a choice here. What's your biggest challenge in securing your sensitive data or your data across your data estate? Is it visibility or classification, accuracy, or just too many tools that are looking at data but not well integrated, not providing you a unified view? Compliance requirements that maybe just are get in the way of, or that are kind of like we talked about earlier, a checkbox only effort, occasional effort, or even just executive attention to the problem. So which of those is your biggest challenge? Obviously, all of them could be challenges. Just choose which one that stands out to you as like the gating factor for your success in this area. And we'll give you a minute to do that as well. I'm kind of very interested to see what this one shows. Probably really hard to choose. It's exactly where my head went. You know what? It's not surprising. It's exactly what I said. It's hard to choose because there's so many of them. It really wants to be a check all type question, right? Yeah, there's no real dominant one. I guess the executive buy-in, that's encouraging. That doesn't seem to be the bigger of the problem set. But all the rest of them, are all issues for various organizations. So thank you again for responding on that. Very, very interesting. Not surprising either. Okay, so let's move on to the last portion then of our session here. We want to talk some about solutions. So I'll just throw this out to either one of you, whoever wants to respond. What strategy can security teams use to move from reactive compliance to proactive security? We've advocated proactive security. How do you get there?
Yeah. How do you get there? So I think one, it's the first thing is just understanding what you're up against. From a security engineering perspective, understanding a few things. Even as a security engineer, I still have to take into consideration like business goals and what business we're actually in. So if I were a financial institute, so it's knowing, and I'm going to say it's knowing what compliance requirements we have, so we know what a baseline might look like, but then becoming more proactive. So for us, it might be, you read a compliance requirement and you understand the minimal implementation to meet that requirement. But again, as we've been saying this whole time, that doesn't necessarily mean your data is secure. So being proactive is like, okay, here's the requirement I have to meet, but what can I do above and beyond that is future proofing? Where if this requirement changes, I'm confident that even if it changes and it gets more prescriptive, I'm still going to meet that requirement. And there may be times where you have to take in consideration where, think PCI, right, where you have to encrypt certain data. You might have to take in consideration that data has to be searchable within a database, etc. A proactive approach to that would be, how can I secure it? How can I meet PCI compliance? How can I go above and beyond PCI compliance while still allowing our engineering org to function as they do? So I think that's the first step, is understanding your data and where it lives, and what a good balance is between what you're doing as a security engineer and what your organization needs to do as a business. And then before I hand it over to Lou, I think the other aspect of that is you can't be data security advocates in a silo. So as you said at the beginning of this, a lot of security teams out there are very lean in comparison to your engineering org. You might have one security engineer for every 200 engineers out there. And the reality is your security team is not going to be able to secure all that data themselves. So proactively working with your engineers to help them understand your challenges while also understanding their challenges is another approach, where if you can train your engineers and collaborate with them, then you can likely turn your core 10 security engineers and extend their abilities just through the knowledge share that you're passing on to your engineers. So I think those are two of the more fundamental ways, without talking about potentially bringing in a third-party tool that can also assist in achieving a proactive approach. And I'll hand it over to Lou for a moment.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, being reactive is never a good thing, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, which I'm sure Zach's had his share of incident response, and I know I have, and it's always not the position you want to be. So how do you approach this reactively? I mean, the good news is that when you commit to security, real security, which is a program, and Zach brings up a great point, which most very technical security people don't always understand. So Zach is one of those unicorns that gets that the business goals have to be in there. It's not just a list of things that you need to do. But if you're doing proper security, you're going to meet your compliance requirements, because at the end of the day, compliance is there to demonstrate security. But that's only one aspect, as we were saying. So how do you proactively go against that? You have to understand where you are. You have to have visibility. Zach mentioned that too. So you have the visibility. You have to have a roadmap. You have to understand your gaps, and then you have to look at how you're approaching security in a way that takes the business goals into consideration, takes the where you're trying to go, and then also what are the highest risks. And that's another area where compliance might fall down. You might have some compliance requirements that you can meet and tick the box on, but that might not tell you, for instance, in incident response, that you're not conducting quarterly tabletops or any tabletops at all across, SOC 2, ISO, or even NIST CSF. They don't prescriptively tell you to do tabletops. They just tell you need to have an incident response plan and a contact tree and things like that. So, those are areas where you can get ahead of it, understanding what is a way to, what are the gaps, what are the highest risk areas to the business, and then what are the business goals, and where can we actually, maybe have an ROI. We believe that there's ROI in security. And the final thought that I have there, which is really challenging for a lot of security teams, is, what is executive leadership and the board? What is their stance towards cybersecurity? Because If they're not committed, it's the popular maxim, the fish rots from the head, right? If you don't get buy-in from your executive team and board of directors, or if they're looking for exceptions to some of the controls that you're trying to put into place because it doesn't apply to them or something like that. They're not living what you're trying to do day to day. That makes Zach's job 10 times harder. That makes anyone on the security team's job that much harder because they're not getting that buy-in from the executives. So hopefully you're part of an organization where the executives are buying in. And if they're not, I would recommend that you align business goals to the cybersecurity program so you can demonstrate an ROI and really try to get their buy-in.
Great, great thoughts there, Lou. And let me remind the audience that we're approaching the Q&A time here. So if you have questions for either panelist, please submit those in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to those. But I have a follow-up for you, Lou, just on that one thought. Certainly, what I've seen is compliance is a big driver and justification for budgeting and for being able to attain dollars necessarily to staff and resource this effort. But what about broader security? Do we leverage one to achieve the other, or is that like a bigger, broader buy-in that's required? I assume you're helping organizations navigate that. So.
Yeah, it often starts when we get a call. Often it's because there's some compliance requirement or there's been some third-party questionnaire from a company like SoFi where they're like, wow, we've got this big questionnaire and we don't do most of the things on there. Can you help us? And then we get involved. And for us, it's an education exercise to say, okay, we'll get you past this. We'll get you to your contract. We'll get you to some revenue, but you really need to commit to this on an ongoing basis kind of thing. And it's going to be increasingly hard. So we're seeing that companies are using, if you have to use compliance to get your security budget, that, go for it, and then partner with the right tools and companies that can get you there. But security, like I said earlier, if you have a good security program, you can demonstrate compliance against that security program. And that's really the whole point of compliance, is to demonstrate that you're doing what you need to do in security, and especially not just during audit time, but all the time, to reduce the risk. Because why are companies asking this of other companies? Why would SoFi, ensure their third parties are not putting them at risk? It's because those companies are holding their data or treating their data, and that's super important. So it's a challenge for smaller companies, startups that are just coming up, and they might have a good product, but they don't have a big security team. There's solutions out there, but essentially, committing to a proper security program from the beginning, or if you're part of a much larger organization and, there's a lot of technical or security debt, trying to get to the right people to demonstrate that you can, security can have an ROI. You need to start to be able to speak business in security to meet your goals.
Super. Zach, any final comments on that topic?
Tangentially related. One of the things that we didn't touch on, though, that I think is super relevant, is just data security in relation to where it appears the industry is going today in the realm of AI and large language models. So I think that's an area that we may not necessarily get to cover broadly here.
Might be a whole nother webinar topic.
Yeah, definitely. Those listening, it's definitely something to consider, because it's one of those things where you may be compliant, and I can assure you, there's going to be requirements coming out now or in the future related to this. So being proactive about how you're thinking around AI and the data that your AI has access to or is using for model training is going to be crucial. And if you don't think about it today, you're likely going to be caught off guard tomorrow.
Well, while we're on the budget topic, I see there is a question that came in on if an organization has a limited security budget, what are the top 3 things to focus on? You want to take a gander at that?
Yeah, I mean, first you want to assess where you are. So, getting an external party to assess and assess. A pen test is not an assessment. We often see companies saying, yeah, we're trying to figure out where we are in security. We're going to have a pen test. It's like, no, you need a full security assessment. So that would be one, an assessment. Two, I would say, yeah, having visibility of data, depending on what kind of company you are. Some companies are maybe not as data centric as others. So therefore that might not be the top one. But often everyone's looking at managed detection response. That seems to be kind of an easy one. So looking after your endpoints, making sure you have visibility of all your endpoints. So that would be number two, like endpoints and endpoint detection and response, and perhaps a managed service around that. And I guess the third one would be around having a governance strategy, like governance, risk, and compliance, which kind of aligns with the assessment too. That's probably the first thing that'll pop up in an assessment, that the policies and procedures aren't there. We just spoke to a company that has been doing things really well for a long time, but it's just not formally documented, and they keep getting dinged on audits. And it's just that simple to write down, and not just canned policies, but write down what the company is doing and really align it with kind of the day to day to make sure that things are formalized. So I guess visibility, endpoint protection, and governance, risk, and compliance would be the top three I would think of.
Great. Good response on that. Zach, you've taken the DSPM journey with us, which of course we appreciate. What have you seen that has helped you with the compliance versus security, or versus the wrong word, but achieving the security goal and maybe easing the compliance aspect? Tell the audience what you've done, and this would apply, I would think, to any DSPM type solution.
Yeah. I think we're going on 3 years of it, and it's been great, to be honest. Having a DSPM solution set up in our environment has expedited greatly the speed at which we understand where we have data. And as with any DSPM or automated methods, it's not going to be 100%. You can't trust it 100%. It's one of those trust but verify. But it's given us the ability to, one, see where we have data, and then verify what that data is. Taking those in the government realm, 10 or 10% when it comes to checks, doing a sample rate of what's been detected to see the accuracy. But there's a few things that I want to call out drastically. Is we're no longer having to do like manual data classification, which when you're talking about petabytes of data, that's not feasible to do something manually. And the reality is when you have manual classification and discovery, it's outdated the moment you discover it. So bringing a DSPM into our org has helped our security team immensely, but I'll actually say it's actually been adopted by those outside of our security team too. So our engineers are benefiting from it as well. And we have several integrations with DSPM now to spread data context across our org and our infrastructure. So I think even though it's called data security, it's really beneficial to the engineering org as well in many different ways.
So a couple quick questions here, and I know we'll start to run out of time. Probably won't be able to get to all of them today, but it's relevant to what you were just saying. What are the common security pitfalls implementing a DSPM, and what are best practices? So I know we've gone on that journey with you, so I'll let you answer.
Yeah. So there's a few things. I think one is understanding the implementation and what it looks like. From a security perspective, it looks easy. I'm going to bring this DSPM in. I'm going to connect it to my infrastructure, and it's going to tell me where all my data is and all the sensitive data. But you also have to think about what you're allowing that DSPM solution access to, because in order to discover the data, it's got to really connect to everywhere, places you don't think you have data. And it's very easy, even as a security engineer, to not realize you may be over provisioning your DSPM's permission set, and in that, creating a security concern yourself with the solution you're bringing in to solve security concerns. The other thing is being very meticulous around the DSPM solution you're picking. There's a lot of them out there. There's newer ones, and there's ones that have been around for ages. And what you'll find is there's just DSPM solutions out there that they're just not accurate. They're not effective, and they're really operating on outdated technology to perform the discovery and classification you're looking for. To summarize a few things.
Good. Yeah, good. All right, so I don't want to turn it into too big of a DSPM advertisement, since that's our business. But thank you for that. I do appreciate it. Lou, another question came in. What compliance frameworks do you think do a better job of integrating real security? I think you hit on one earlier with the NIST prescriptive, but
Yeah.
curious what else you might say to that question.
Listen, we love the CIS 18. CIS 18 is real security. You're not going to get audited against CIS 18. It used to be the top 20 critical controls. Now it's the top 18, and it breaks those controls down. I think there's all up maybe 100 or something controls, but CIS 18, it's also considered reasonable security. If you're conforming to that, they also go in order. So, the first two are asset inventory, and inventory of basically software and hardware that you have, which is what we're talking about now. That also includes inventory of data. And you need to have visibility. So CIS 18 all the way is what I would say.
Great. All right, let me see what other questions we have real quick. We've covered some of these. Any comment about government? There was a question in there looking the past few years of data breaches in the federal government, DoD. What would you recommend? Obviously, there may have been a recent breach. We'll find out, right? Since government seems to be a decade behind the curve, the question is, is there things that are unique in that realm? And that's probably a better question for you, Lou, but.
I think Zach has some experience there as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Zach. I saw you went off.
Yeah, no, that's a fun topic. I was in the military, and then I contracted for the government on a lot of data security and system security. So I totally relate with the decade behind the curve. It's also a tough thing to answer because you are very much unlike the private sector. The public sector, you're very much under a lot more strict, I guess, I don't want to say requirements, but things you're allowed to do. You're talking about different classification networks, as well as you're a decade behind technology because the processes in place that are required to go through in order to get newer tech. So I think one of the best things you can do is just start off as being an advocate, and when you see something, as this sounds, when you see something, say something. But be an advocate, become a true advocate for what you are seeing. And when you do find something, if you're in a position where you can actually write something up and list out the risks you're seeing, list out why this is something that needs to be addressed, then those are things you should be doing. Because it's all or nothing type of effort. If you don't have everyone around you being security minded and security focused and pushing the envelope, it's never gonna bust open, and you're never gonna break through.
Yeah, I would only add to that. That was great, Zach, and right on. The only thing I'd add to that is that there's a perception maybe that the the government has been breached more, but the reality is the public sector is getting breached every day. I mean, and just so everyone knows, you don't know about 95% of the breaches that happen, because there are ways to make those not reportable. I'll leave it at that, but you're only hearing about the ones where they've had a duty to report for a number where they just absolutely couldn't avoid it. Otherwise, they would have.
Yeah, those are really good points. And thank you both for responding. I think given that we're running out of time here, let's wind this up, and I'll give you one more chance to have any closing comments. But before we do, I just want to share a quick little summary, and also in the I think it's in the chat. Sorry, in the chat. If I can get to it, I put in so a link or two to some of the follow-up things that you can do. So I'll cover those in a moment, but in case you exit early, make sure you at least click one of those links, and you can get one of our reports relevant to this topic. So one of the key takeaways I think we've really spelled out pretty clearly is compliance doesn't necessarily equal security. Security hopefully can become a superset if you're effective. And I think, Zach, you made a good compelling case for that. The teams that need visibility, right? That's kind of job one. Knowing where your data is before you can move to any kind of a proactive hardening or posture response for it. And then DSPM is a solution in this area. It's certainly something you should investigate further as one approach to automating some portion of that discovery and accurate classification. I saw there was a question about classification accuracy, and apologies, we can't get to that right now, but there's a long set of resources and papers and things on our website. So I would encourage you to go and read about that, because we are renowned for the level of accuracy that we provide in classification. But most importantly, you can come to our site, book a demo or a deep dive discussion, download this report. This was done by an independent analyst, and it focuses in this area. Not only does it review various solutions here, but it talks importantly about the trends and the gotchas and things like that. So it's a great education piece. And I've put the link directly in the chat, a link there for it. And of course, you can follow us and attend future webinars and seminar sessions like this to learn more. So we appreciate your time. Lou, Zach, each of you got 30-second closing comments.
Yeah, I would just say, try to commit to an overall security program, people, process, and technology, and you're going to hit your compliance targets. Compliance is good, but it's not the only thing. So committing to an overall program, continuous improvement, use CIS 18 if you're looking for a standard to start with. That's prescriptive, but you're not going to get audited against. And I think those are some good takeaways.
Yeah, and just looking at security holistically, don't lead your security based on your compliance requirement. They need to complement each other. And they both need to be considered. But yeah, not leading security with a compliance mindset, I think, is super valuable.
Thank you. And I really appreciate both of your guys' help and perspective here. And Haley, will let you close it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave, Lou, and Zach today for the wonderful information. And thank you to Sentra again for the presentation. With that, we'll go ahead and close it out for today. Again, thank you so much to the Sentra team, for David, Lou, and Zachary. If anyone has any questions, of course, for VIB, you can always reach us at webinars@vib.tech. But if not, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their Thursday and a fabulous Friday tomorrow.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.